Jake Carter wasn't trying to change the course of interstellar diplomacy. He just wanted a sandwich. A mid-level engineer working maintenance on the sprawling Galactic hub Station 9, Jake was the kind of guy who coasted through life with low ambition and high sarcasm. His day had started normally. Fix a few oxygen regulators, dodge his boss, and hit up the merchant deck for lunch. But somewhere between dodging a six-legged vendor and misunderstanding a glowing alien sign, Jake found himself in the wrong line. To him, it looked like a food stall. There was a queue flashing menus, he assumed, and someone handing out tablets with disclaimers. He tapped accept without reading, like any human used to long software agreements, and assumed he was pre-ordering a meal. What he didn't realize was that the menu listed qualities the Dravanti Empire valued in suitors, and the disclaimer was a legally binding entry into the royal mating tournament. The Dravanti were one of the oldest and most formal empires in the galaxy, honor-bound, ritual-obsessed, and proud. Their crown princess, Zilari, had reached the age of choosing a mate, triggering an ancient rite, the Tournament of Union. Held once a generation, the contest invited noble-born warriors, scholars, and dignitaries from across the stars to compete in challenges designed to test strength, intellect, and compatibility. Jake, of course, had no idea. When security drones scanned his ID and guided him into a glowing chamber, he assumed it was some kind of food court. Even as the first round began, a test of agility involving giant balancing stones over a pit of purple slime, he thought it was a VR obstacle course with high production value. He stumbled through the challenge, literally, slipping, tumbling, and unintentionally knocking a favored Varkulon noble off the stones. The crowd roared, some in outrage, others in laughter. Dravanti media began broadcasting clips of the human anomaly across their networks. Princess Zilari, seated high in the observation dais, watched with veiled annoyance. The suitors thus far had been predictable, muscled, preening, and obviously more interested in power than partnership. But the human, he was different. He was confused, ungraceful, and entirely outside the script. And when he finished the challenge by clumsily landing face-first into the platform and giving a thumbs up to the crowd, she couldn't help but laugh. A quiet, genuine laugh she hadn't experienced in years. Backstage, Jake tried to leave, but guards wouldn't let him. The AI officiator welcomed him to round 2, offering him sustenance pellets he mistook for free samples. Realizing something was off, he started to panic until someone mentioned grand prize. Intrigued, and still thinking this was some weird station game show, he decided to stay a little longer. Meanwhile, across the empire, people began to take sides. Was the human a joke, a subversive protest, or a dark horse destined to upset tradition? Whatever he was, he'd survived round 1. And to the horror of highborn houses, he'd somehow become a contender. By the end of the day, Jake Carter, sandwichless, sore, and utterly baffled, was trending across half the galaxy under the tag, Human Contestant. And the princess? She leaned forward in her seat, curious for the first time in ages. This was going to be interesting. Jake Carter was officially in way over his head. After the chaotic blunder of round 1, Jake assumed the Dravanti would see him for the clumsy mistake he was and send him packing. But instead, the officials declared him a living anomaly and ushered him through to round 2 of the Tournament of Union. The entire galaxy was watching, and somehow, Jake was a viral sensation. But despite the confusion and ridicule from the elite contestants, he wasn't about to quit now. After all, he hadn't won a sandwich yet. The next event was Rite of the Matriarch, a challenge where the suitors had to demonstrate their strength and agility by performing an ancient Dravanti ritual, racing up a series of spiraling, gravity-defying towers while dodging massive floating rocks. While the other contestants, all towering warriors and competitive scholars, climbed with graceful precision, Jake spent most of his time yelling and scrambling like a man trying to escape a collapsing elevator. He slipped more than once, careened, off an edge, and even knocked a few rocks out of place, sending one of the towers toppling over and crushing his nearest competitor. To his shock, the crowd cheered. Turns out, his clumsy, wild style was a hit. The crowd roared with laughter at every misstep, but they also saw something they hadn't seen in years: an unrefined but genuine approach to the challenges. Jake wasn't trying to impress anyone with calculated moves. He was simply doing his best to survive. And somehow that made him seem more human than any of the carefully poised Dravanti nobles. The princess, Zilari, who had been watching the contest with a mix of disdain and duty, found herself perplexed by Jake. She had been trained to expect the best, strong, intelligent, and poised candidates who could balance both power and grace. But here was Jake, completely inelegant, hilariously awkward, and yet strangely captivating. He wasn't pretending to be something he wasn't. He was just Jake, a human who had stumbled into an ancient tournament, and his refusal to back down or play by the rules was oddly refreshing. As round 2 progressed, Jake's luck seemed to continue. During the challenge of the mind, where suitors had to solve complex puzzles using telepathic links to alien artifacts, Jake managed to solve one simply by accident. The challenge was supposed to test intellectual sharpness and wisdom, but Jake, who had no telepathic abilities, hadn't understood the instructions at all. In a panic, he put his hands on the artifact, pressing random buttons. Instead of triggering the failure system, his accidental input unlocked the artifact's databanks and provided the answer. The crowd gasped. The judges blinked in disbelief, and Jake, who thought the challenge was just an interactive art exhibit, smiled sheepishly and shrugged. "Guess I got lucky," he offered. Meanwhile, Princess Zilari couldn't stop watching him. She had spent most of her life preparing for a suitable match, someone strong, intelligent, and worthy of her position. But Jake? He was everything she was not, imperfect, goofy, and real. She had never met someone so genuinely human before, and strangely, she found herself rooting for him, even if she knew it would cause chaos in her political world. As Jake continued to bumble through each round, his bizarre charm began to win over more than just the crowds. Zilari's heart was slowly softening, even if she had no idea what she was feeling. Could a human truly be the right match for her? The rules of the tournament dictated a certain level of nobility, but in Jake, she saw something else, something she wasn't sure how to define. With every awkward triumph, Jake was moving closer to the final round and further into the heart of the princess. Jake Carter couldn't believe it. Somehow, despite his awkwardness, confusion, and a series of fluke victories, he had made it to the final round of the Tournament of Union. It was the strangest, most unpredictable turn of events in galactic history, and Jake was beginning to realize the full scope of what he had walked into. This wasn't just some weird space station game show. It was a matter of political importance. The Dravanti Empire was built on tradition, and the Tournament of Union was more than just a contest of physical and mental prowess. It was a sacred ritual designed to ensure the best match for the Emperor's daughter, Princess Zilari, and her eventual role as Empress. The winner of the tournament would not just gain her hand in marriage, they would gain power, influence, and the alliance of the entire Dravanti Empire. For millennia, the contest had been a serious affair, a stage for warriors, scholars, and noble suitors to prove their worth. Jake, a bumbling human engineer with zero knowledge of intergalactic politics, was an utter outsider. He had no claim to power, no noble lineage, and no intention of playing the game. Yet here he was, standing on the precipice of becoming the most controversial figure in galactic history. As Jake advanced, the backlash from the elites was swift and brutal. Powerful factions within the Empire began to voice their outrage, accusing him of dishonoring the tournament and mocking Dravanti customs. The high-born suitors who had spent their entire lives training for this moment were furious. They saw Jake as an unworthy interloper, a human with no place in their exalted society. It didn't help that the media had latched onto his every mistake and made him a viral sensation across the galaxy. Memes, opinion pieces, and outrage flooded the Dravanti networks. The most vocal critic was Lord Draxil, the leader of one of the Empire's most influential houses and a rival suitor. He was everything Jake was not: cultured, polished, and extremely competent. Draxil had spent years cultivating his status as the perfect match for Princess Zilari, and he saw Jake as a threat to everything he had worked for. He publicly accused Jake of cheating, claiming that the human had somehow manipulated the challenges to his favor. Behind closed doors, Draxel went further, orchestrating covert attempts to sabotage Jake's chances. Accidents, tampered equipment, and shadowy figures sent to intimidate him. But no one could stop Jake. His unintentional success in the tournament had only made him more popular, and the people began to view him as a symbol of hope and rebellion against the oppressive traditions of the Dravanti. The media dubbed him the accidental suitor and painted him as an underdog hero. For the first time in years, the Dravanti Empire was divided. Half the population supported Jake's clumsy, unorthodox approach, while the other half felt betrayed by the mockery of their sacred customs. In the midst of all this, Princess Zilari found herself torn. She had always been taught that her suitor must possess strength, grace, and nobility. But Jake wasn't any of those things. He was human, impulsive, and unpolished. Yet there was something undeniably real about him. Every other suitor seemed like they were playing a part, but Jake was simply himself. And as much as Zilari tried to convince herself that he wasn't fit to be her match, she couldn't deny the strange pull she felt when he was around. The political tension reached its peak when Emperor Draxon, Zilari's father, personally addressed the growing conflict. He was no fool. He knew that Jake's presence was disrupting the Empire's long-standing traditions, but he also recognized that the situation had grown beyond anyone's control. Draxon's eyes turned to his daughter, silently asking for her opinion. Princess Zilari, though hesitant, felt a spark of defiance. She knew what her duty demanded, but she also knew the price of duty. The question remained, was Jake truly an accident, or was he something more? As the final round loomed, the Empire's fate and Zilari's heart hung in the balance. The final challenge of the Tournament of Union was one that had been passed down for generations. It was called the Test of the Heart, a symbolic trial where suitors had to prove not only their strength and intellect, but also their capacity for true leadership, compassion, and sacrifice. For centuries, the Dravanti Empire had used it to assess the worthiness of potential rulers, and in this case, it would determine the future of Princess Zilari and the future of the Empire itself. The challenge took place in the Emperor's Grand Hall, a vast and majestic arena that had seen the rise and fall of countless suitors. Jake Carter, still bewildered by his place in all this, stood at the center of the hall, unsure of what he was about to face. In his mind, he hadn't wanted any of this. He was just a human who had accidentally stumbled into a tournament that was far above his pay grade. But now, with the fate of the Dravanti Empire resting on this final test, he couldn't back down. The trial began with a single, chilling question. What would you sacrifice for the future of the Empire? The suitors, including Jake, were instructed to make a choice between their own ambitions and the well-being of the people they hoped to lead. The challenge was meant to be a display of political savvy, wisdom, and a willingness to make difficult decisions for the greater good. Most suitors, including the remaining highborn competitors, answered with cold precision, promising to protect the Empire and secure their legacies. But Jake, standing there with no royal blood, no power, and no desire for the throne, felt utterly out of place. He looked at Princess Zilari, who was seated in the royal box, watching him intently. He knew she expected an answer, something worthy, something grand. But Jake had no speeches prepared. He wasn't a leader. He wasn't a politician. He was just a guy who had accidentally entered a contest. Yet as he looked around at the tension in the hall, the way the other suitors tried to impress the Emperor with hollow promises, something clicked inside him. Jake spoke from the heart. "I'm not here to rule," he said, his voice carrying through the hall. "I'm just a guy who came to a space station looking for lunch. But if I'm being honest, I think what the galaxy needs right now isn't more power or control. It needs more people who care, who listen, who don't think they have to be perfect, but who try to do the right thing when it counts. I'm not perfect, I'm not your typical suitor, but I'd fight to make sure Zilari, and everyone else, gets a chance to choose their own future." The room fell silent. The crowd, who had been eagerly waiting for Jake to falter, was stunned by the simplicity and sincerity of his words. Even the emperor, whose face had been set in a mask of imperious judgment, seemed taken aback. Princess Zilari's gaze softened as she watched him speak. She had never expected something like this, an answer that wasn't calculated, but honest. The emperor stood. "This is an unexpected response," he said, his voice echoing throughout the hall. "But perhaps it is the one the Empire needs." In that moment, something shifted in the air. Jake's words weren't about tactics or strategy. They were about something far more powerful, the ability to lead with empathy, humility, and a genuine desire to build something better for all, not just for oneself. The Emperor's final declaration came as a shock to everyone. He announced Jake as the victor, not because of his strength or his prowess in the challenges, but because of the heart and sincerity he had shown. "It is clear," Emperor Draxon said, "that this human, through his very mistakes and flaws, has demonstrated the greatest strength of all, the ability to put others first. Perhaps the future of the Empire does not lie in tradition, but in change." As the crown was placed upon Jake's head, his mind was spinning. This wasn't how he'd planned his day or his life. But as he glanced at Zilari, standing beside him with a smile that seemed to mix amusement and something deeper, he realized that maybe fate had a sense of humor. Jake, the accidental groom, had won the heart of the Empire's princess, and, somehow, had become a symbol of hope and change. The Empire was on the brink of something new, and Jake had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in his life, he was ready to find out.